You just introduce yourself, like your name, current role, and a little bit about your background.
Yeah. Hello. My name is Swadha Rai. I am a data analyst at RTC. I'm on the data and tech team, so I kind of touch all things data. Working with all the other teams at RTC, including marketing, partnerships, helping everyone find data-driven solutions, and then I also do a lot of research and side quests, helping other teams because I've actually been a rewriting the code member since I was in college.
Awesome. What's one fact, I guess, that actually, wait, how long have you been when did you first become an RTC member?
I joined so back in the day, RTC actually had a membership and a fellowship, and they're two separate things. So I joined as an RTC member in, I think, the end of 2018. So I was a sophomore in college, and I think by my junior year, which was 2019, I was like a fellow. So I've been around for a while.
You
I've
have.
seen all of the different iterations. I saw RTC blow up in 2020. Now I'm an early career member and also a student because I'm doing grad school right now. So best of everything, I think.
Yeah, you've just been here for probably longer than most even employees at this point. So,
Yeah.
what's like one fun fact about yourself that people wouldn't be able to tell from a resume?
I think, yeah, this is definitely not on my resume anymore. Or my resume is very STEM, but I really like doing a lot of DIY stuff. I wouldn't call myself like a hobby collector because I try a lot of new things and then don't, you know, stick with them. But like the things that I do try to learn how to do on my own, I'm like good at. Like I can make one thing very well. I can, uh, you know, make random things. Or like I have a lot of niche interests, but I just like trying a lot of different things. I don't know if I necessarily have like one very intense hobby, and I think that's fine too.
Yeah, I think I mean, as someone who also has a lot of collects a lot of different hobbies, and like tries them out, I totally understand.
Yeah, you end up with a lot of equipment of sorts.
What were your internships? So I know you've told me a little bit about your internships, but where did you work? And what were your roles? Just a little bit more about your internships.
Yeah, so I had three internships total, but they were at two companies. So as a sophomore, I interned at MetLife, and I interned as both a data analyst, and then the following semester, I interned as a software engineering intern. And then the next year, my junior year summer, I interned at Capital One, where I ended up going back full time because I loved it so much.
Awesome.
Um, yeah.
How did you land those internships? And did RTC play any role in those internships?
So I became an RTC fellow right after I accepted Capital One. So I don't actually know because it was on my resume, and Capital One has been a long time partner. So I'm not
Mhm.
sure how much RTC played a role in that way, but I do love this question, and I ask a lot of people this question because, well, I'll get to this, but I think it helps with a lot of imposter syndrome. I think landing internships and jobs takes a lot of like to some degree luck, but I also think you can make your own luck. So I think it also requires a lot of persistence. I think I'll focus on how I got my first internship because I think it has like sort of a snowball effect. Once you have one, it's easier to land other ones. I actually met the recruiter for MetLife at Pearl Hacks, which is UNC's like Women in Tech Hackathon. There was a career fair there, and I was a sophomore. I had just switched into computer science. I didn't know anything. And people had resumes, and I did not have a resume. And so I talked to this guy at the booth, and I was like, oh, like, this place seems cool. And he was like, oh, do you have a resume? And I was like, nope. I went to go print one, came back. The career fair had shut down. So I was like, okay, well, that's that, I guess. And I emailed him, and I never heard back. Then the computer science department hosted mock interviews. And I remember them being like, this will in no way affect any chances of you getting like a real interview. This is just so you can practice. I had signed up. I didn't want to go. It was like pouring rain outside. I was like just like stressed about it because I hadn't like the idea of doing a technical interview when you feel like you don't know anything is scary. And my roommate convinced me to go. And I had a mock interview with a mystery company. They don't tell you who it is. And the interviewer and I really hit it off. And we were just like chatting. he did a very good job, like, interviewing and, like, calming down my nerves, but he had asked me about, what's a project that I worked through. And I actually just pulled up my demo from the hackathon the week or 2 before, and we were just, like, talking a lot. The mock interview went well, and he was like, like, "What are your questions?" And I was like, "Oh, I always tailor my questions to the company. Like, I can't, I don't I can ask you questions, but normally they'd be more specific." Turns out he actually was from MetLife. And so he was like, "Talk to me at the career fair after this event." And I did, and he introduced me to the MetLife recruiter, who happened to be the man that I had talked to at Pearl Hacks before and had emailed. And so I was like, "Hey, like, I have my resume now." And he basically, like, really solidified to that recruiter that, like, I know enough. Um, so that's how I got in touch with this recruiter. And it actually I didn't even land the first interview or the first role for them that I interviewed for. It wasn't the best fit for me, but I think, like, I had made an impression because they called me back with an opportunity to interview for another team, and that ended up working out, and that is how I landed my first internship. And I think it just really goes to show, like, a lot of the time, even in my past, like, recruiting with companies, it normally takes a couple of touch points with a recruiter or a couple of, you know, missed connections, I guess, until it works out. But I think just, like, being very eager and, at that point, I knew a lot about the company and just expressing, like, how much I really wanted to work there, worked out. I also think that asking this question and telling people how you get things is important because the whole first, like, month that I was there, I was like, "Oh, I got this off of, like, a fluke. I got this off of connections." And the more you talk to people, you realize that everyone networks and everyone does land things by networking and then interviewing. And I think it just, like, made me understand how the networking/recruiting process works, and it's not just applying online into a void.
Yeah, I that's you actually hit on something I've heard from a lot of people where they've met at, like, an event or something, and somehow that, like, snowballs down, and they ended up getting either, like, an internship, or the internship they applied for wasn't right, and so they, um, were told that they can apply to another internship, and that ended up being the right place. So I feel like that happens a lot more than people expect.
Yeah. No, it definitely does.
Yeah. So what kind of projects did you work on during any of your internships? Like, what were your favorite things that you've done? And I don't know how much you can actually say about those, but just a little bit of, like, a glimpse into how your internships went.
Yeah, I worked on a bunch of stuff. So actually, when I started at MetLife, I thought I was a software engineering intern until the first day. And then I realized that I was actually a data analyst intern because my background, I had just switched to computer science and statistics. And so I think the first role that I had interviewed for was very front end focused and it wasn't really my fit. So I ended up on a data team that had a couple of engineers. And so my project was basically on the data end of things, figuring out why we lose clients of a certain group insurance subgroup. But I also really wanted to explore, like, my software engineering potential, I guess. And luckily, the team was a great fit for that. And I was basically able to get my hands on a coding project by being persistent and asking about it. And I really liked that project. I think it ended up taking higher priority on the team and more of my time. And that actually helped me get my fall internship, which was pretty much continuing that project on. As for my internship at Capital One, it's a bit more technical, but I basically built with my team like an API proxy, and it pretty much is like a traffic controller for APIs. That's kind of what we worked on. And that was definitely something very new to me, very outside of my wheelhouse. But luckily, I was on a team that knew that all of us were, learning. Um,
Okay, cool. So, for your internship that you extended into the fall, I think you mentioned off camera that you had presented your work to stakeholders in order to get that internship. Is that correct? And could you
mhm.
explain a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so because this was originally a side project that was going to be assigned to my manager, and I had started working on it because she was out, and then they were like, "You can just take it," and I was like, "Great." But because I was the sole person working on it, they really wanted me to, finish the project, but it's something that I hadn't started at the beginning of the internship. So it was very much in flight. So the way that I would describe this project is we had basically a team that was like offboarding off of like one system and onto another. And it was like a week long process. Like it was just a big hassle to find out who had and had not been offboarded. They had to email someone. It would take like a couple business days and then they'd find out. And I pretty much built a tool that could like instantly check by automating like the querying process. So it did sit like right in between like data and
Mhm.
tech. And it was very not advanced. It was a very small project, but my team was like, we would love to have you know, like come in and finish it, but we don't have the budget. So if you could present this to the higher ups, that would be great so that they can give us the budget to have you finish it. And I was, you know, very nervous because I hadn't done that sort of like presentation before. I didn't know what to cover. I didn't really know how to, I guess, like take those technical concepts I learned and throw it into a businessy context. And so I think I had like, you know, some great mentors there. I think my managers really helped me you know, quantify the information, almost like resume writing in a way, like but with more of an audience. And it basically had like a little demo, showed them everything that I had done, showed them more importantly where it could go if I had more time to work on it, and kind of explained and quantified how much time they would save with this project. And so think it went pretty well. I mean, I did get the offer over the fall. And yeah, it was pretty fun being able to do all of that because it wasn't, you know, what I expected was going to be in my job description. But I think like being at a company that really cares about your growth and what you want to do and being able to cater to that is really important. And I think that's kind of why I thrived there, was because I was able to combine, I guess, all of my different interests. I did start off in college as a business major before I switched, so it was exciting to work on that.
Yeah. It kind of blended a little bit of what you had previously learned and where you were then. How do you balance the school and an internship? Like, I feel like that is very difficult.
Yeah, I think it's super hard. I don't even know if I would want to do that again with the course load that I had. I plan everything. Like I plan everything to the hour when I'm busy. Something that I do right now too with grad school and school. I basically had a timeline figured out for, you know, recruiting. I think I was in 6 classes at the time. They were all STEM. I was planning on going abroad, so I had like that application. I pretty much started in the summer prepping for the fall semester. And I think being able to communicate with your manager is very important. Explain to them, you know, like it's very different to have a full-time internship and then balancing it with school. I did take classes during the summer alongside my internship, so that had already kind of helped. But I think I had to get good at context switching, and being able to block out at the same time, like deep work time. So I think a combination of all of that, plus I was able to lean more on other members of the team with engineering experience, especially when it came to things like deploying our project, which I had no clue how to do. I was able to, I think, collaborate more and have it be less of an independent project at that point.
Cool. So I know you also one of the big things I wanted to talk to you about was you had 2 return offers. Can you explain a little bit more about how that came about and maybe any like a little bit about how they came about, who you got the return offers from, and just like a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I think, yeah, so because I had worked over the fall, I had a return offer from MetLife, you know, to continue working there. And then also when I was at Capital One, I had gotten a return offer for the next or for full time. I think being very clear about the fact that you're going into the internship and wanting a return offer is great. I say that because I used to work at in college, I used to work as like an IT manager of sorts, and it's from managing people that I realized this, like being upfront about that stuff seems very scary on one end of it, but if you're like managing someone and they're telling you this is where you want to go, it is then on the manager to get you there. So I think like being very clear about your goals, even though I don't enjoy, you know, thinking about like evaluations and things like that, but telling them, you know, that you want to return, and how, like, what are the steps that you need to accomplish to get there is really important. I think that at MetLife it was pretty easy. I think, like, for example, that presentation was pretty much a presentation of why I should return, why I am valuable, as well as why the product should be there. And I think at Capital One, most companies do want to hire you back because they have higher yield. They are very transparent about the fact that your internship is basically a very long interview process. Like, it is your opportunity to prove why you should return. I think that that was my first internship as like a true software engineer, and I was very intimidated. I was working with people from some great computer science schools, people who have been, coding for a lot longer than sophomore year onwards. And the conversation I had with my manager was very much like, I want to be evaluated by how much I learn, not by how much I knew coming in. And the conversation I had with him by the end of the summer was like, your attitude is right. You have done everything you could have to learn this project and explain it to people. And I think that that was also a good culture indicator for me, was knowing that they do care about more than just where you start, and they care about where you end up, but they also care that you're putting in the work to get there if you don't start at that point. So yeah, being very clear about it, asking, progress checks. I think that I had to drive. A lot of that was just like being like, am I on the right track? Not even that, but like, how am I comparing to, other interns you've had in the past, asking them those sort of questions so that they have to answer, um, was scary and helpful.
So did you do a lot of that in your one-on-one meetings? Did your manager also, and this might be different for your different internships, but did your manager like schedule those one-on-ones, or did you kind of take the reins and like be like, no, I want to have one-on-ones with you like weekly or however often you did? So
Yeah, I had specifically looked for very structured programs for my internships because I knew I was very new. I wanted mentorship. My first internship, it was definitely a lot more manager driven. And I think my manager was great. They were able to, really like flesh out the process of one-on-ones. I think they were probably every 3 or 4 weeks or so, but we worked right, like we were sitting near each other. And so it was very, very chill. I talked to her all the time. And then at Capital One, it was every single week, which was great. And it would be, talking about you, talking about your manager, talking about the project. It was very structured. But I think like in the beginning, it was a lot more of like just talking, getting to know my manager. I think I had some really good mentors though who, really showed me how to use those one-on-ones to talk more about, your goals and not just vibes. And,
definitely.
structuring it a little bit more. I think a lot that I would do is bring my wins and my challenges. And I think that really helps because there are a lot of things that feel like they matter when you're doing them. And I feel like looking back, I'm like, oh, that wasn't a big deal, but they were at the time. And so I think like checking in and like making sure that they know the stuff that are the wins throughout does a lot for like the impression you're leaving on the internship. And I think that, yeah, keeping them structured, seeking out resources, finding good mentors are also very important.
Yeah. Did you you just briefly mentioned about having mentors in your internship program. Was that like something that was structured within the programs themselves, or did you like actively seek mentors outside of like among your team or even outside of the team?
A bit of both. So I definitely had like one mentor given or like matched with me for both of my internships. But I remember my first week at Capital One, or one of the first few weeks, I had a call that was like RTC and Capital One. And I hadn't like opted into anything and I didn't know how they organized this, but they had found all of the RTC members. And we had like a Zoom call, and it was just like very nice because I was like, wow, there were more RTC people there than I think that I knew from my school in general. And so we had like our little group going. And then we were like, oh, this is great. There should be a channel for all of the, women in tech interns. And so we made an intern group. And then Capital One actually gave us like budget to host like virtual events. This was during COVID. I interned during COVID. But it was like fun from like a social setting, but then people really started using that Slack to ask questions that they felt too dumb to ask like other people. And I think that like being able to like go to that group of other interns who are doing similar things to you and asking those questions, and then kind of relying on like their networks. So like, oh, my intern might not have told me something, but someone else's intern told them something, and being able to have that network was really great. I think that, I mean, I think it was great that RTC even had that. It wasn't even something I was like looking for I knew that I was missing until I had it. And I
Mhm.
think that just because I was on a team where I was, the only woman, and then a couple levels up, also still the only woman, I think it was like really nice to have a group that felt a bit less intimidating because a lot of the time you get matched with very successful mentors. And then I would get intimidated by that. So I think being able to find a group of peers, and then I would always say like find a mentor who is not like your official mentor too, like a friend of a friend or something like that, where you can have a bit more like casual and like honest conversation because they're not bound by any sort of strict mentorship rules. I think it's very important. You can get, a better pulse on different culture things and different processes that without, it's just a little bit more casual and a little more real. So
Yeah.
I think I had mentors, and then I also found mentors, and they were both very valuable.
Awesome. That's so cool. I mean, I wasn't at RTC during that time, but I think that's really cool that like you were able to find other interns who were all in that same like kind of space. And I think especially when you're remote, it can be hard sometimes because you don't always feel like you're a part of it. I mean, you feel like you're a part of a team, but like having that space kind of built that team for you. So I guess how did you decide? So you had two return offers. How did you decide what the right choice was for you?
Yeah, so I didn't have 2 return offers at the exact same time, but I did have my MetLife offer the same time I had my first Capital One offer, and so those were kind of interfering, and I think that, for me, one of the main things that drove me to pick the internship that I did was, I had mentors at school as well, and I had heard a lot about the company. I had felt like the culture fit there was very strong. I also, at the time, really wanted to intern somewhere that was not just like my hometown because MetLife was located maybe like 10 minutes away from me. I would just drive there in the morning, come back. So I really wanted to intern elsewhere. I did end up interning at home because of COVID, but I think like it had a lot of what I wanted to work at a like more of a tech focused, or like I wanted somewhere with a very structured tech internship program. And MetLife was very new, and I had already gotten that experience. I also wanted to go more into like the software engineering role and see what that would be like. But I think like I've had really good relationships with like both recruiters, and I think that like I felt good about it because I was very lucky to have companies where they were very understanding of like me following, my goals and figuring out what the best fit is for me. I think throughout the process of interviewing at Capital One, it was like the right level of like challenging and also not intimidating. I felt like the interview process there had felt like the most like complete or like representative of what I have to bring, which is very rare. I think that no one enjoys an interview process, but I think that that one I really did like, and I felt very good about like I felt like if the interview was an indication of what the role would be like, that I'd be in a good place, and so that's the one I took.
That's awesome. Yeah, I feel like I mean, not internships, interviews can really make or break how you feel about an organization. Like you could have a great interview with, or a horrible interview process throughout with like an organization, like your dream organization. And like, if you have a horrible interview process, I mean, that's like almost a red flag of like, if the interview process is so bad, hopefully actual organization isn't that bad. But yeah, I feel like the fact that you felt so good during the interview process was a huge like green flag about the your choice. So
Yeah, I will say I also, although like I had gotten the offer before I was like an RTC fellow, I know a lot of people who were in RTC who also had gotten the Capital One offer. So I think like I had also heard why they picked. And so I think like that word of mouth was also helpful. Um, Even though it was like I guess this unknown entity for me, like I had heard a lot of good reviews. So I think that that helped as well.
that's good. It's always nice to hear that like the community is also like providing positive information so that you can make like your own good decisions. So awesome. Looking back, before you started your internships, what's like a piece of advice or something you wish you knew before going into internships?
Ooh, I think. this is something that I'm sure everybody says, but, like, I think just, like, accepting the imposter syndrome, um, I think that that was probably the hardest thing for me throughout, like, all of my interning was feeling like I didn't know as much as everybody else, but also I think, like, throughout the internships, I had to realize, like, that was fine. I think, like, as a woman in tech, it's very interesting because you have to have a very high bar for excellence, but I think, like, I needed to be, like, more okay with, like, not knowing things and feeling comfortable asking things. I think that I had to, like, train myself into thinking that, like, me landing these opportunities were not a fluke. At the same time, there was a lot of, I think, like, when they interview, for interns, they're kind of hiring on potential, but that is fine, but I think, like, one of the things that I feel like I've talked to people about is, like, that realization that the return offer or the full-time offer or just, like, performance evaluation after that point is just then flipped into just competence, and so I think, like, just for me, I had to put in a lot of extra time learning things I didn't know. We used to code, in, like, groups. We would, like, all have to code and share a screen with our tech lead, and I was so intimidated by it that I'd wake up at, like, 8 in the morning, code what I needed to code beforehand, and then on these calls, like, then be able to code on the spot. And I think, like, those things kinda seem silly, but you're also not going to develop those skills unless you have some sort of practice, so there are things like I think being able to, like, balance the 2 of, like, putting in the work to build your confidence and then also just not overdoing it is a hard balance to strike, and it's not necessarily something that I wish I had known beforehand, but I think, like, I didn't know how to tackle it, and I think that I definitely did my fair share of, like, overthinking and overpreparing, but I also know that, like, my work style, I learned the best on my own, and just being able to adapt to, like, working in a group environment. I had to do the things that worked for me so that I
Mhm.
could thrive group spaces, so I think just a mix of all of that.
Yeah, I think, one of the things you said, I think really hits home and I think is really important, especially for early women in college. Like you have to kind of know your work style. Like I know for me as well, I do well in groups, but I kind of need to prep beforehand and do a little bit like work outside. Other people thrive in like talking through things and everything. So I think knowing like one of the main things I got out of what you just said was like knowing your work style so that you can like make your experience you can do the best for your own side of the experience. So
Because I think, like, what I had first, tried doing is, like, during these calls, like, we would take some breaks because we had a lot of Zoom fatigue. Again, it was during COVID, right? And they still were, like, adapting. These weren't supposed to be as mentally taxing on a call for 4 hours type of deal. It was because we had to switch to a virtual environment, but I think, like, we would take breaks, and then I realized that I get more done during the breaks, than I do on call, but I was just the only introvert on my team, and they also had, like, experience from school doing that sort of, like, group work, because I talked to them, and I was like, "How does this not intimidate you?" And they're like, "We do this all the time." So I think, you know, I needed to make it work for me without disrupting, like, the group dynamic either, and I think that's why I ended up doing prep by myself. I think, like, the bright side of that is, like, I did so much, I guess, like, I learned through taking notes, I learned through, writing stuff down, and being able to do that also helped me in other aspects, being able to translate what I did into business words and stuff like that, like, I think, like, the preparing this is one thing my dad says, but, like, no level of work is gonna ever, turn out like, any work you do is always gonna have a positive impact on you. I think that, like, you could see it as, like, "I can't believe I'm putting in an extra 2 hours before work," but I think it's a learning curve, and once you learn, you learn.
awesome. I love that. I feel like I mean, there's definitely the balance between too much work and like burning yourself out and doing the work you need to so that you don't burn out, especially when you're on like a 4-hour call is really important. That stresses me out thinking about that.
Yeah.
Um, so do you have any tips for making the most of a summer internship, especially like if you're on a smaller team or as an introvert? Do you have any
Ooh.
like
Yeah, I think the one of the big things for both is having like actually developing relationships with your coworkers. I think that it was like our group calls. I was not necessarily, it wasn't bonding time. It was a lot of coding time. Luckily, like our intern group was great and we were all pretty chill and relaxed. But I think like having, meet and greet calls with everyone on the team really then made me feel, again, less intimidated. And I think for me, I talk about that a lot because the less anxious I am about work, the better I'll do. I think like seeing those people as people and not as, scary tech experts, even though they're also interns, or scary tech coworkers, the tech lead and stuff. Like seeing them as people made it easier for me to ask for help. I think that they see us as people too. I think just like developing those relationships was very important. I think one-on-one interactions as an introvert make things a lot easier. I think like once there are so many people on the call, my brain stops like processing the same way. Um, so both of those things, and then it's like when you're already slacking someone, it's a lot easier to also be like, oh hey, can you help me with this thing? I think breaking down like the formality barriers, especially when you're like the new intern, no one is gonna come and be like, wow, that intern is asking so many questions. Like they don't expect you to know everything. And I think I hear this at every like call where someone is offering advice is like people will wish that they asked more questions. Um, yeah, and I think just like creating connections so that you feel comfortable and then taking advantage of feeling comfortable with people and being able to rely on them. Because in the real world, that's how it's gonna end up working.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's like anytime I think about like working in like I mean, I've been here for I guess 8 months now, but when I first started at RTC, like even that was like me trying to like get you like get to know people and also like asking questions. And I know like my boss, she's like, ask all of the questions all of the time. And that's like something I'm trying to also do. And I think it really kind of also helps you get to know people, but also helps people get to feel more comfortable with you if you are asking questions. At least that's what I've experienced when people ask me questions. I'm like, oh, I can answer that. And then I feel more helpful. And then I'm like kind of helping them out. So
Hmm. Yeah, and I think like consistent meet and greets too. I'm just thinking about this because you've said that you've been here for like 8 months. I think like at RTC we do a lot of meet and greets in the beginning, and I think that's true for like a lot of interns. Is you'll have your like week of meet and greets and stuff, but I think having like I think the scheduling like follow up meet and greets, even if it's like a once a month meeting with my tech lead, even though I'm interning for like 10 weeks, I think getting feedback from those kind of people and not just your manager is very helpful. But I think that is something that they don't necessarily tell interns to do. But I got the idea from another intern, and then I was like, okay, let me schedule mine as well. I think that is also, um, I guess, a tip I have for interns is like, it's not just your manager you should be getting feedback from. And then, I mean, the more you're talking to the rest of the team, like, I'm sure it's only going to result in something good.
I just worked on and wrote an article based on a webinar that we had that we previously done. That was by an internship mentor. And she said, she's like, network, like make, talk to people outside of your team, even like people in marketing or like in a different role that you might not realize because it's just helpful to like get to know the company and the whole organization. And then you feel like you're more like a part of the team rather than just like kind of another person who works for the company. So you're part of the team rather than just another person.
I think like you hear that as an intern, and I know when I was an intern, I was like, what will I get out of that? Because we know I knew that I like team preferencing is like Capital One, for example, doesn't recruit based on a team. A lot of like the internship programs, they'll just put you on a team once you get a return offer somewhere. So I was like, what's the point of networking? But you never know when like a connection you make will end up, being helpful in any realm. They might be at a different company. They might switch to a team that's relevant to you. Just getting different perspectives on like who does what, and it's helpful. I think like I went when I was at MetLife, I had this like talk that I went to that was like a data science talk. And I didn't know what data science was at the time, but hearing her, talk about it and talk about the different like ethical trade-offs they have to make. I found all of that so interesting, and it made me like figure out what I wanted to do as a career. And like those there are more things to be gained from networking than just like having an in somewhere. I think
Mhm.
just like learning about stuff that you're not going to learn about at school. Yeah, definitely recommend networking everywhere. There's a lot to gain.
There is, there is. So final question, and I know you've talked about it briefly, and as someone who works for RTC, I'm sure it has had it's a huge part of it. But how has being a part of RTC shaped your professional journey?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much I can say for this. Obviously, like working at RTC has been shaped by being in RTC. But I would say like I actually heard about RTC through my suite mate. And I didn't, really consider that before as like RTC help. But I had people who I did not know were in RTC until after I joined, but like RTC has been shaping my professional journey in ways long before I was even part of it. Um, there were a lot of members of RTC at UNC, and I didn't know until I like officially joined. But I think like having that support network, being able to hear more word of mouth things, I think I didn't have like friends who were like women in tech in college up until I actually interned at Capital One. Um, I knew like people I was friends with who were also computer science, but it's not like we had classes together or talked about tech or anything like that because I was just I switched later. I was a bit behind. And so I think just like having people to talk to was the main thing. I think like once I actually joined and got involved, I was like many of the other members like lurking in the Slack, but I think like there was one moment where I really just like was overwhelmed with like school, was overwhelmed with a bunch of stuff, and I was like, I don't really know if this is for me. And I remember somebody else had made this long post in RTC, and it basically sounded like I had written it myself. And I think like even being able to read that and then seeing all of the comments and responses for this other person, but someone I was really relating to at the time, like was helpful for me. I think like the reason it was easier for me is like, oh, I'm sure that person's smart, but they're overthinking it. And then being like, oh, wait, that could be my situation. So I think like even earlier on as a student, it was really helpful in that regard because it was like the things that people are vulnerable about and opening up about. I think you would only like I find RTC the only community where I would do that. I think like a lot of the time you can have friends at work, you can have friends in tech, but it's not the same. I think like RTC has this balance of like you can open up to people because they don't know you, but they still care about you. And that's hard to find in other places. And I think you can be more honest with spaces like that. Um, yeah. And then I mean I feel like it's really helped me in my early career journey as well. Working remotely, I think has been a great way to make friends. Do coffee chats with people. It's nice. Also I think just like talking about work and well, not at RTC. I don't have any work issues at RTC, but I think like talking about like different experiences and realizing how common they are, is very validating. I think like, small things like whether it's like a microaggression somewhere or like something that you're taking personally because you think it's a you problem, but it's not. Actually, it's just nice to have a group where people relate to you. Um, I think it's done a lot. I think like I mean the main thing I would credit RTC for like retaining me in tech. I know that's exactly what it tries to do, but I think that when I was like at a turning point, it made sure I kept going.
I love that. I love hearing that. Like, I know, like, like, see people type it, like, RTC has made like, helped me stay in tech, but, like, hearing it from you, I feel like especially because like, I've talked to you, I've met you in person, it it really like, that is why I joined RTC, like, why I came to RTC, in my position. Like, I just like, that is so great to hear. But yeah, so I think that's all of my questions. Do you have anything else you want to share or anything, or is that it?
I feel like that's it for now. I mean, I'm always creeping in the Slack, so
I would
talk
say
or
you're
anything.
handling a lot in Slack. You guys, the data team, I feel like you handle so many of like the technical issues, and like anytime anyone has any like Team RTC things that I'm like, I'll also be like going through Slack and being like, oh, I can't answer that question. I date a team. I need your help.
Yeah, no,
What's
I love it because I know my team or my work is a lot more, like, data centric right now, but I think, like, RTC helps me keep a pulse on, like, the engineering side of stuff
Mhm.
too. Yeah.
I love that. Well, thank you so much. Cool.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Okay, thanks.